They are the largest economies in Asia and Europe with a history of strong bilateral trade and investment. So why is there concern about a potential rift between China and Germany? Hello, I'm Anand Naidu and this is The Heat. Since the 1980s, under German Chancellors Helmut Kohl and Gerhard Schroeder, ties between Germany and China have grown increasingly close. A strategic partnership was formed with deepening trade relations, a trend continued by Angela Merkel since she took office in 2005. Last year, bilateral trade between Germany and China continued to rise, with China as Germany's fourth largest export destination. In fact, almost a third of all European Union trade with Beijing is between Germany and China. Recent developments, however, have raised questions about whether that relationship has moved from one of partners to that of competitors. We'll ask our panel. But we begin in Berlin with CCTV's Guy Henderson. And Guy, how have Germany's economic and political ties with China evolved since Angela Merkel came into office?
Well, lately German foreign policy has been shifting quite rapidly to fit its more dominant position in Europe. But for the most part of German Chancellor Angela Merkel's 11-year premiership, it has, at least outside Europe, been this country's commercial interests which have come first. And that's meant that it's been welcoming to the idea of increasing Chinese investment and trade with China, which was negligible a decade or so ago. In 2015, stood at about $1.3 billion in terms of Chinese foreign direct investment. And it looked as though it was going to be a record year this year as well, certainly in the first few months of 2016 it was. But in October, the German economy minister withdrew approval of the takeover of German chipmaker Ekstrom by China Grand Chip Investments. The United States had apparently expressed some concerns that some of the technology this German company were developing could be used for military purposes in China. And it's left plenty of questions around whether this could be a hiccup in the development of those economic ties or whether this could mark a shift towards a tougher approach by the German authorities. In theory, it's the perfect matchup, according to many economists, because China is a cash-rich economy that's looking for the very kind of high-tech expertise that a country like Germany provides. But there is increasing anxiety here amongst politicians about growing public unease at the forces of free trade and globalization. On the other hand, it does put Germany in a potentially tricky spot because it is a nation that relies heavily on trade for the growth of its economy. And while the United States, another important trading partner, is possibly looking to put up some of the trade barriers, a country like China, on the other hand, is actively encouraging increasing free trade and investment with Germany. So still questions here about where Germany's going to go next, I think. And at the moment, not necessarily a reversal in policy, but particularly after the US election, perhaps somewhat of a pause.
Thanks, Guy. That's CCTV's Guy Henderson reporting from Berlin. Let's get to our panel. Richard Weber is the chairman of EUROCHAMBRES, that's the Association of European Chambers of Commerce and Industry. He joins us from Brussels. With us from Princeton, New Jersey, is Klaus Larres. He's a member of the Institute for Advanced Study and a distinguished professor at the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill. And Xin Hua is a senior research fellow at the Shanghai Institute for European Studies and a research professor at Shanghai International Studies University. Thanks to all of you for joining us. Xin Hua, let me start with you. How would you characterize the trade relationship between China and Germany right now?
The trade relations between China and Germany is mutually beneficial. Germany could got a lot of cheap consumer goods from China that could offer a lot of benefits to the consumers in Germany. And to China, actually, it can get many technologically intensive and advanced commodities from Germany. So it just does good to both sides. So this is a mutually beneficial relations that push forward the relations between China and Germany.
Okay, let's go to Klaus. Klaus, earlier this month you wrote that, and I'm quoting here, that the prolonged honeymoon between China and Germany has come to an abrupt halt. Can you explain that to us? Why did it come to this halt?
Sure. I mean, in principle, I agree with the other speaker that trade relations are quite good, and they have been quite good since the late 1990s, and Chinese-German relations overall are really quite good. People for some time talked about a special relationship. But recently, more tension and some friction and some clashes have occurred, and that regards Chinese investment in Germany, and people talk about an investment binge, where Chinese companies, often state-supported companies, have bought up an awful lot of German technology firms, like this last summer, Klaus Larres, a machinery company. Then they bought a robotics company, KUKA, in the summer. And now, of course, Extron, a chip maker, is under consideration for purchase by a Chinese company. And the German government has stepped in and is now reconsidering whether that purchase can go ahead. And that has concerned the German public and also the German government, because it seems that a lot of technological know-how, cutting-edge know-how, is being bought up by China. And Germany wonders whether they are losing their basis for their innovation and for their industrial basis, and whether also important security-related material and know-how may go to China. This is causing concern, and this has led to some tension and some friction in the relationship. So in that respect, the honeymoon, that really very good relationship, overall good relationship between China and Germany, has certainly come under some tension.
Richard, do you think these concerns that have been expressed by the Germans over the movement of technology, high-end technology, to China, is that a setback for trade relations between the two countries?
Yeah, I mean, personally, I'm a beer brewer. I run a large beer company, and we have some very good examples within the beer business that Chinese companies are coming here to Germany and buying some companies. And my personal relation to China is that there was a Chinese company coming here and giving us a German brand name to fill beer, German beer in, and to export. That is for beneficial, mutual use. And so my experience, my personal experience, are only good. But in the last time, like Klaus said, there are some friction.
Xin Hua, what is China's response to these concerns that have been expressed by the Germans, that there could be a transfer of what the Germans think is sensitive high-end technology to China?
Here, I think that the Chinese companies, when they are making decisions to purchase some technologies and to conduct some merger and acquisitions in Germany, they are mainly for the purpose of business, for the purpose of finding more, relatively more competitive technologies to help them to seek more profit through the business on the market. You know that just after the several decades development, that now the Chinese corporations, whether they are private corporations or state-owned corporations, they're just generally for the purpose of making business and to seek some profit. So relatively, I think that they're relatively less ideologically or politically motivated. So I think that it's very natural that there are always many technological transfers between different countries and between different firms, mainly just because the economy is evolving forward. There are always some companies who want to sell their technologies for money, and there's always some business firms that want to purchase some technologies for the purpose of money. I think that now the companies in Germany want to sell their technology for money, and Chinese corporations are considering to buy these technologies for money. It's very natural business transactions.
What do you make of that, Klaus? It's a business transaction, and it shouldn't be undermined by concerns.
Yes.
Yeah, go ahead.
There is some truth in that, and one shouldn't exaggerate the tension. You know, there were accusations of a wave of protectionism which is going through Germany, and so on and so on. And I think that is exaggerated. There is no danger that there is a protectionist attitude now developing either in Germany or in China. And actually the reaction of both sides is quite understandable. You know, of course, Chinese companies want to buy interesting companies in Germany. Why wouldn't you want to buy cutting-edge companies? You wouldn't like to purchase companies which are not at the cutting edge, which are less good. Of course, you want to go for the best. But of course, the Germans also see that, and they don't want to lose their best companies. So I think both sides have a point, and both sides, you know, from their own point of view, are quite justified in doing what they are doing. And therefore, there needs to be a way forward. Some fixed rules, some certain rules need to be defined and implemented. And the Germans have to make clearer which companies are out there for sale, which can be purchased by foreign companies. And we should, of course, say that China should not have a unique role. You know, it is really all about foreign companies purchasing German cutting-edge companies. So more definite rules should perhaps be developed by the German side, and these rules, these new rules, should be perhaps stricter than they have been hitherto. And of course, China needs to apply these rules and needs to stick to these rules.
And Richard, looking at these tensions, these frictions, as Klaus calls them, between China and Germany, do you see this trade relationship evolve now from one of cooperation, one of it being a partnership, to one of being competitive, where these two sides are competing with each other?
If you want to be partner, you have to be competitor. That is the rule of the business. Sometimes you are partner, sometimes you are competitor. That's like in the family. Sometimes you are fighting against your brother, sometimes you are with your brother. But I think personally, the tension actually accumulated in Europe is protectionism, and the protectionism is only a tool for the populist people, and we as businessmen, we have to fight against that. Perhaps we are too much accustomed already to a very good behavior of the business, but the different crises in the past saw that many people lost their jobs. And protectionism is coming out to some political parties. But I think personally, don't be afraid. Businessmen always have good rules, and in the long run, we are all on to free trade.
Xin Hua, there have been complaints from European companies, from other companies around the world as well, that it's difficult to buy Chinese high-technology companies in China. Is that likely to change the restrictions on the purchase of those companies that are in place right now? Will they be lifted?
I'm relatively optimistic towards the future and towards the situational changes in the future. You know that we know that both China and Europe need each other. So I think that China will adopt some reform measures that will build a more leveling playground for the European companies in the future. And I think that the investment environment in China for the European corporations and for European investors will be more friendly and relatively more institutionalized in the future, that could offer better conditions. So I'm still relatively optimistic towards the future for the European investors in China in the future, and I think that European investors will surely find some business opportunities to make more money and to find more opportunities to produce more profit for themselves in China in the future. But of course, now we know that in any country, the absolutely leveling playground for domestic and foreign corporations still do not exist, and a lot of improvement and a lot of measures should be adopted.